Hello and welcome to this version of the Memory Team weekly meeting. It is January 18th and we'll jump right into the updates on what's going on. So Alexi, you're up first.
Yeah, I just wanted to update on GitLab exporter that one more merge request which droppings matrix was merged today, and I have another merge request which removes the code which was producing this matrix, but I was waiting for the mentioned MR to be merged. So I will pick it up in parallel with Puma, but it's not high priority because it won't affect performance itself. It just clean up. So, Matthias.
Yes. Yeah, I was working on the configuration switch that would allow us to swap out the rack server, which we first had thought was the main offender in terms of memory use. Turns out it wasn't. It's like, it was my mistake, to be honest. Like I should have spent more time on actually validating that hypothesis. It sounded very reasonable. So I kind of, yeah, I ran some experimentations and benchmarks, and WebRick came out using less memory. It's so tricky to measure this stuff. And it turned out that it was, again, a similar problem to what we had experienced with the main app, that if you actually run these experiments over a longer period of time, it actually swings pretty wildly. And yeah, so it was actually not conclusive in the end. So Camille found a different way to get memory use down, which works equally well for any of these. So this is now kind of like reduced to a nice to have, but it's done anyway. So I thought, why not ship it? Yeah, there are two MRs open. One is the main MR for Omnibus, it is reviewed. I'm just waiting for folks to merge it. So I don't know if it's going to make 13.8. And then there's also the corresponding docs MR, which is kind of, yeah, we need to merge these together because one doesn't make sense without the other. Yeah, that's it.
So about Nakayoshi fork, it's in maintainers review. So yeah, just waiting for Stan to review it, and thanks team for the feedback. It was great. About Puma single, I just starting it today, so I underestimated Nakayoshi work because there were a lot of merge requests and a lot of verification needed to be done. So I just asked a question, and I see Camille and Matthias. Camille answered that I probably will start with measurement, and then I will try to fix the application to not get broken on Puma single runs. So that's it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this just like puts us in a better position to have this option enabled. But then we definitely need to. We did a lot of like groundwork now, and then we can circle back to looking into GC tuning the main app. It was just really difficult to do it initially. So all of these things will help with that. So one thing I added though is, and that will also help with this, is it's kind of difficult right now. Not difficult, but it's cumbersome to run Puma in single mode because you always have to go into your Omnibus instance and comment out this initializer that checks that you never run GitLab with less than one worker, right? It's kind of like a safety guard, right? And so yeah, Camille had a very pragmatic suggestion. Why don't we just add like a development switch, undocumented just for us, that allows us to bypass this until we actually support single mode, because I don't think we should wait for that. It's just a little like quality of life improvement. So I sent out an MR for this just now. Well, you can just send set an environment variable and we'll bypass that initializer.
Yep, thanks.
Cool. Related to GraphQL, like I was a little bit stuck finding the best way how to fix and move specs so we can be sure that like Sidekick and regular specs works fine, and to move all GraphQL specs to the engine. It turns out that like if you want to move all the specs in the engine itself, then you will need to mimic all the dependencies from the main application to the dummy application, which like increase the complexity of the solution, and it will be really difficult in the future, because these engines will grow in time and adding new stuff will be more complicated. So I discussed it last week with Camille, and we found a way how to still split those specs without moving all those dependency in the engine itself. So I'm still working on it. Like, the solution seems to work, but I will still need to fix some of the specs. And then the next step is, it will be really nice that we measure like the memory impact when this engine is loaded and when it's not, and to compare with our base metric. And I will still need probably to add these GraphQL specs to another CA job, so we can run all the specs without GraphQL and only GraphQL specs separately as CA jobs. So I will probably need help with that, because I never added a new thing to the CA job. But yeah, that's
I'm actually having a small suggestion, because like Alexi mentioned about this Puma single Prometheus measurement. And I think if you, Alexi, would figure out like the recipe for accurately measuring the best possible case for the memory usage, you could then give these spells to Nicola to measure the same way as well.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, but best way, you mean in terms of what? In terms of GC settings, or in terms of like the metric setup?
I'm kind of thinking that like what we were playing with Matthias on these GC settings, it kind of shows that it's not performance-oriented settings, but they are the best conservative memory settings that you can probably get. It should give you pretty accurate, let's say, in the best case scenario, minimal memory usage. So I'm kind of like would suggest you to like sync with the Matthias and like what he was testing, to translate that to the main app and get some like baseline measurements. So you could then like Nicola could use this config as well.
Yeah, but do you need this with Puma single, Nicola, or just with regular Puma setup?
Yeah, I think that we should test it with Puma single either way.
Okay, okay.
I'm actually thinking that, Nicola, in your case, it's about like measuring side key.
Yeah, true.
With and without. So like you're not about Puma single, you are about like measuring side key.
Yeah, but that means that it can be Puma single.
That means it's orthogonal to you.
Yeah.
But just to clarify, I think Matthias started working or not on similar issue, or is it on hold for now?
Yeah, I'm still on that. I just took like more than a week of detours because it was so difficult to verify any of these hypotheses. So we now changed a bunch of things, and actually the work on GitLab Exporter helped us as well to understand. Thanks to Camille, like he did a really great job, like looking at GC settings for GitLab Exporter as well, and we will have to check like if the, similar tweaks will work well for the main app, maybe not, but it's a good lead, and so if we can make the test results a bit more stable so that we can actually have proper before after comparisons. We have that new endpoint now that's already on master, on main, sorry, and what else was there? Yeah, if we have maybe an easy way to run Puma single, that will make testing a lot easier. But yeah, I'm happy to sync on it again.
Okay.
All right. Anything else on the work in flight? I might take that as a no. So this next item came from a one-on-one during my conversation with Fabien, and we were talking about what is the success criteria for running GitLab in a memory constrained environment. And we're going to talk about it during today's meeting. Fabien, you got a couple of comments in here.
Oh yeah, I just threw them in there. I actually forgot that we spoke about it. So this is, again, fully on top of things here. So like these are just some high level comments from me. I think with all of this effort, and feel free to disagree. This is really up for discussion, right? It's like, it may be worth saying, okay, at a point in time, maybe after 13.9, right, to just sort of stop and say, given all of the things that we've done, what are the things that we've actually improved, and what does that look like? It may be a more complicated answer, but at least I think at that point we will be able to say, okay, this is the impact that we've had, because I think that would help us also establish, given all the things in the future, like how much more work is that, right? How much have we accomplished to this point? And then we can also see, is it worth continuing down that path? And then something completely optional, and this is maybe a different topic altogether, so we can talk about that, is I was a little bit intrigued to, like, from the product side, to sledgehammer this a little bit, and just also, like, after all of this like memory work, essentially just subjectively at least disable everything that we feel is not necessary for a really small GitLab instance, like really cut these things out, and then also add that to our evaluation, because it may be, and I don't know, right? We will come to sort of a conclusion, say like we saved 500 gigabytes or a gigabyte of memory just by making these improvements, which is great. But if we just disable the metric stack because we think it's useless for this use case specifically, we'll save another 350 megabytes, right? We don't need to make memory improvements to this. We just need a product decision, which is a different sort of playing field, right? But that may be kind of interesting as well. Those are my two high-level thoughts.
Yeah,
I think Camille tried it, right? During 2 Gig Week, or somebody tried it.
Yeah, I think some of those measurements are in that issue that I just listed there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that would have been my first choice as well, because there's definitely there would be some real gains if we were to look into that. But Fabien, what would be your feeling after we had caught up with Sarah and the team, the monitoring team? Like, it sounded like they were not a huge fan of the idea of not running this by default. So yeah, again, it's more like a product decision.
I appreciate their concerns, right? And I share some of them, but I think also we need to I think the question is, if if it would take us let's say another 6 months to actually get to this goal, right? Then by making improvements, right? Or we could actually look at the use cases for this instance and say, let's just disable some of those things, right? And then we are there essentially by tomorrow. It's a very different approach, and I think we should at least have some data to support it. It may just not fly, right? As in, people may decide that this is not a good idea, but that's also okay, right? I think it would still be valuable to make that statement. And on top of it, I think Camille pointed this out last call. I think if we had some documentation, right, for a memory constrained instance that says, okay, these are some of the changes that you can make to make GitLab more memory efficient, right? We could be very pragmatic and just have an optional section and say, here are some of the product features, right, that actually consume a large amount of memory. This is how you can disable them, right, if you don't need them. And maybe we'll have them enabled by default, right? But we may just be able to give some documentation for people to actually disable it either. That may be a sort of a cheap way out of that. And I think that's just a high level thought. I was just contemplating on this last week a little bit. It's like, maybe we need to be a little bit more decisive and say, and like in this regard, right? It's like, maybe we can't have everything, right? And maybe, it's okay. But we don't need to make that decision for everybody either, right? We can just document that that's an option. But it's just it's a different question.
I'm kind of thinking that like we could consider like grading, like memory constraint. We could start like, let's say, like with the 4 gigs. This is how you run that. If you have 3 gigs, this is how you configure that. If you have 2 gigs, this is how you configure that. And these are the limitations of this 2 gig installation to achieve some kind of like working. And I mean, it's still better than like not having anything. So maybe it's like just having this grading that like on the 3 gig, we just support all the possible features because we have enough space. On the 2 gig, this is what we support. And
yeah.
I mean, you can still run more features on the 2 gig, but it's gonna be slightly miserable, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's also I think the question there is, and I think this is also something that I discussed a little bit last week, like sort of the effort versus output, right? If these are some things that we can do relatively easily, right, and you know, they are maybe more controversial, right, then but that may still be better than investing a large amount of time on it, right, with like maybe not as much impact for this very memory constrained environment. And we can at least tell people that that's an option, right? But I mean, we may get some flack for doing this, right? I'm just putting it out there. It's a little bit controversial, but I think we should also be transparent, right, and say, you know, actually, this is a big thing that we could do, right? We may not be able to do it by default, but you know, we shouldn't hide that either. I mean, you can disable Prometheus right now if you wanted to, right? Or the monitoring stack, right? It's not something we never have supported before, right? It's
I'm kind of thinking that really like the way maybe how to approach this documentation is like maybe for each of these grading, it's to provide like that GitLab RB configuration, like the settings that do configure different aspects in a different way, that like they are maybe more and more memory conservative settings. And this can include like what we Matthias kind of looking at the GC settings that may hurt the performance a little, but maybe this is at the trade-off. So maybe this is like the task for me. Like I'm just gonna maybe start writing like this documentation with these different gradings and like the expectations about how the environment should be configured, and like we could then fill the like this section about like the configuration for the GitLab RB that you should put in these different environments.
I think it's also, in like, again, to be really transparent from my end, like I think this is really important, the 2 gig week, but I think we have also some work that is going to kick off that has global implications also for .com, right? Which I think and in general for a very large user base, right, where we can make changes. And so I'm also a little bit, you know, when we do those things, I think in the medium to long term, you know, they are actually also quite important. And I think this is for me to say, maybe in the next, let's say 2 months or 2 releases or so, we come to a point where we can say, this is what we've accomplished here, right? In product, the improvements that we've made. And these are some of the settings that you can still tweak to disable certain things. And that is where we are at. And then, you know, you can always evaluate, is it worth continuing spending time on this for another month, right? Or are there maybe other things, you know, in the product overall that we consider more impactful, right? Because we can probably spend a very long time on this, right? And I think we should at least define a point at which we say, okay, is this something where we want to continue on this because there are still like a few things that we really can do, right? Or is it getting harder and harder for less output? And I think I spoke about that with Camille. I think it is still true in general, maybe, but also here, maybe 80%, you know, finishing 80% of it is, you know, a lot easier than the last 20%, which will then take another 80% of your time, right? And I think we should at least surface that at some point also to, you know, the product team and to enablement more generally, you know, when we're essentially at the point and say like, hey, we've done 80%, if you want us to continue, we're going to spend a lot of time on this because it gets really hard, right? And there are all these other things that we won't do that are maybe more important. That's kind of my gut feeling.
I totally agree with this. Thanks for raising that.
So how do we go about the first bullet there, time boxing and finding a point where we can make those trade-offs? I mean, it's great to talk about it, but what's the actionable items from here?
I think the actionable items should be like restricted list of issues we are trying to accomplish and some deadline, or like some end date we're making decision.
Yeah, and
so for example, we're taking like GC settings like Puma single, disabling stuff and whatever else, and what Nicole is working on, and then we are making our decision after implementing those. Or if we're running out of time, we are making our decision as well. Not everything is implemented.
And I mean, we have our score. Yeah, no, it's fine. Thank you. We had our score, like our ranked list of issues, right? But they had like, you know, weights in terms of effort it will take. I mean, because at some point we will also just run out of these like lower hanging, more immediately available issues anyway. So that would probably be a good point in time to review and then say, no, we're just like not even picking this up because that would just take us another quarter or so to even finish. Because there were like a couple, I don't want to say moonshots, but like some were like quite complex, some of these issues that came up, but definitely multi-month, if not longer. So those are probably, we might just not get to. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. So maybe we just have to revisit this. Maybe we should just really kind of check in, you know, with our own estimations here every now and then.
I think maybe my suggestion would be that maybe the new release is 13.9 is going to start, right? Maybe when we're sort of 2 weeks into the release, we can revisit this. So maybe in a couple of weeks and just see, okay, where are we at, right? Because then we also have an interesting opportunity to either say, you know, by the end of 13.9, the only thing that we're going to do is create all of the documentation and, you know, say, this is where we are, or maybe we say we need another release because there are 2 or 3 things that we can still do and that they are worth doing, rather than it may be 13.10. But I think we can revisit this in a couple of weeks or so. That gives us also a little bit of headway to, you know, to look at some other things. Realistically, from my experience, it's more likely going to be 13.10 than 13.9, you know, because things take a little bit longer, but we can always be a bit ambitious.
Cool. All right. Yep. I put it on our future agenda there. So it's a good idea. Thanks for reminding me about the RISE framework, Matthias. It's a good call. Sorry, I think I cut.
I don't know if this is like, I don't know if this is going to help, but we also have a major release coming up in April, I believe, right? That would be 14. I wonder, like, if there's anything that comes up where we think actually making a hard cut would be helpful here by ripping something out. For instance, that might be difficult to do otherwise. That might be a good point in time, because there won't be another one for a year, right? I'm just saying maybe this is something we should consider because it kind of fits that timeline, right? Because I think 1310, that would put us in March, I think. So if there's anything we want to, we're considering to completely retire, that might be a good opportunity. I know GitLab Exporter is probably not that, but maybe something, you know, comes to mind.
Yeah, good point, actually. A lot of changes requiring this kind of hard cut. A lot of big changes in there. So maybe we'll find something.
I don't really have anything else to add to what was said. I'm kind of thinking we should wrap up what we have now and like see if it's still worth like investing further and like how much leverage we got after updating documentation.
Because I think the one thing, this is my perspective, right, that may not be shared by everyone. For me, if you do something like this, the success is not necessarily that you manage to get the GitLab's memory usage under 2 gigabytes, right? The success is understanding, why you are stopping at a certain point, right? If you know what you've accomplished, right, and you can make a specific statement and say, we've done this was the impact, right? These are the things that we may be able to do, right? But we will probably not be able to go under 2 gigabytes unless we deactivate some of those things. That's an outcome for this, right? And it may not be, what we would have hoped, but that's the reality, right? And then, I think that's where you need to end, right? And that's, I think, good enough for me, because then you can actually explain to people, if they say, oh, I wanted it to be under 2 gigabytes in all instances, right? Then, you can explain what that means, right? And what the trade-offs potentially are, right? And then, that's how it is.
All right, anything else on this topic? Okay, moving on to the next. So other things that we've talked about in various one-on-ones is what's up next for future milestones, what's on our roadmap. And these are some of the items. There's a mix of issues and items, issues and epics in here. This first one, we probably need to promote to an epic. There's a lot of work that needs to take place there and need to measure the impact of this. It's not obvious, but the accumulation of Rails boot time taking as long as it does is costing us a lot. Need to do some research to further quantify the impact of that. And the rest of the issues out there, you all can read, and we can, over the next couple milestones, prioritize, order, and get some more research on these. So I just wanted to throw these out there because our actual roadmap that I created a while back doesn't contain a lot of these. But these are a few things that have been brought up about when are we going to work on these? Are we going to work on these? And what are the priorities? So once we figure it out, then we'll go through the RICE framework on these as well.
Yeah,
should we go through RICE framework, or do you want to make some high-level decision which ones we are taking at all?
Yep, high-level decision first, and then RICE framework later on.
Yeah, also some feedback that we got on the RICE work in the database group as well. It works better for larger epic items, right? When you have to discuss sort of the impact of moving to Ruby 3 versus object storage improvements, right? These are sort of at a level where people, if you do a little bit of research ahead of time, it becomes a little bit easier compared to implementation issue 1 versus implementation issue 2, right? It's that may be a little bit too fine-grained in some instances. I mean, it could be an issue, right? If it's a very specific feature as well. But the reality is most things take more than one issue and more than one MR to resolve. So.
Yep. All right, that's it for the agenda. Any other topics folks want to cover today?
Yeah, but what about these issues you mentioned? Are we going to plan some event to discuss them, or did you just put them for us to be familiarize ourselves with them? So
just familiarize. Yeah, 13.9 is pretty booked with the memory constrained environment, so I would imagine 14.0 is, or sorry, 13.10. Sorry, numbering will be where we start talking about these and better grooming them out.
Okay.
I had only one thing that I forgot to put on the agenda because I just thought about it, and that is to do with the potential of using a more sort of Kanban style board view for the memory group as well. I think we had some process discussions. The database group is moving towards it. I'll just put it on the agenda for next week, but I would personally be quite up for creating a sort of a process for working that primarily emphasizes reduction in cycle time, right? So rather than focusing on releases and saying, oh, we do stuff for a month, right? And these are all the things, really focus on having a single board, especially with items on them, and moving them from, you know, actually having them to having them in production as fast as possible. Because I think that is, that I think especially for some of the work that you do, I think fits actually quite well, because you kind of try to come in, make improvements, right? And then move out again. And I like that way of working a lot personally. So I probably need to give an overview of how it works and why I think it's good.
Yep. I was going to ask the same. So I'll link the example database boards down here so folks can take a look in the meantime. All right. If there's nothing else, I hope everybody has a good day.
Yeah, great to see everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
See ya.